Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started. Hey everyone, it's your host, Joanna here. We're back on Work in Progress and wishing you guys a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holiday as well. So for today's episode, we're diving into the topic of media mindfulness during the holidays. And it's that time of year where I know it can become quite overwhelming and stressful to keep up with the chaos and everything happening online. So I'm sure a lot of us can attest to the fact that the holidays can make it difficult to manage our media usage, especially when everyone's glued to their phones or their devices. So our goal today is to arm you with some practical tips to navigate media consumption so you can be truly present and enjoy your holidays. So joining me today is Scott Campbell. Scott is a post-family professor in communication and media at the University of Michigan. Hi Scott, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here, Joanna.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Before we get started, would you like to tell me a bit more about what you do and your profession as well?
Sure. Well, I'm a professor, as you said, at the University of Michigan. I've been there since 2005, and my particular area of expertise is on the social uses and consequences of mobile media. I worked in the quote-unquote cell phone industry in the 1990s when it was just launching nationally in the United States, and then went to graduate school to study the uses and consequences and have gone on to study it from there. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. But I'm also, I teach classes in communication and media more broadly as well.
Amazing. And I know that you were involved with launching like 2G wireless. I'm not too sure about how that works, but tell me about that.
Okay, so 2G refers to second generation wireless infrastructure. And this is when it became digital, which had enhanced capacity on the network to support many people to use it and to make it more affordable. And so 2G was where we really started seeing cell phones becoming taken up widely and popularly in everyday life. And so I was working at the Sprint PCS headquarters in Kansas City, Missouri at the time. And when I was there in January of 1997, we had not quite, but we were just about to launch the first national network that had the 2G wireless infrastructure. So that meant that it was for the first time that regular, ordinary, everyday life people could text, for example, and call each other while they were on the go. Then after that, 3G heralded in smartphones and apps. But really to use them, you kind of had to be on Wi-Fi at the time, 4G is really what made apps and smartphones useful in a mobile context. The network really kind of allowed you to use your locative apps and things while you're going around reliably. But streaming is no good with 4G. That's what 5G does, is it gives us the capacity to do the really heavy data stuff while we're on the go.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. What made you shift your focus more into like what you do today?
So I had a background when I was younger as an undergraduate in journalism, and I was doing advertising, and I was set up for a career in advertising, and got actually a job in advertising that I turned down because I just didn't feel inspired. I wanted to take some time and to work, but not I didn't want to relocate my life and dedicate myself to advertising. I wanted to work and think about what I wanted to do. And so I ended up working in the technology industry, originally in the laptop computing industry for a consulting firm, and IBM was our largest client, and we were helping them with retail sales of their laptop PCs. And from there, I went to Sprint PCS. So really, I would say just advertising turned me off. When I went when I shifted from a consumer that was growing up, watching advertising, listening to advertising, laughing with the really funny ads, and then I became somebody who was going to get paid to make those ads, and I saw what was going on behind the scenes, that was where I saw that it was different than what I had expected, less fun, and decided to make a shift. It was luck that put me in the technology industry, though. I mean, timing, a person in their 20s during the laptop and cell phone eras, that's good timing, but also just kind of lucky. Those were where the jobs were. And so I was able to take my advertising skills and be a communication specialist and do marketing operations and things with these companies. But it became the technology that I became more interested in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what would you say is your favorite part about the work you're doing now?
Ooh, that changes. But I'll just say it's always been publishing journal articles, doing research that meets the expectations of your colleagues through blind peer review and expectations for rigor at a good journal. And I'm in a very cooperative, not competitive profession. We do science, social science, and we're trying to share our knowledge. We're not really trying to compete knowledges. We're trying to share knowledges. But the little competitive factor that I enjoy is, a journal that most papers do not get accepted in, and you got a paper accepted there. That gives me a little charge, especially when I'm doing it with junior scholars or graduate students, and it's really meaningful for them to have that experience, to get published, to give them the confidence so that they know how to go on and do that themselves. So that competes with teaching. Sometimes teaching creeps up and becomes my favorite part of my job because, for example, I'm just finishing a small seminar right now with upper level seniors, undergraduate seniors, specifically on the uses and consequences of mobile media and a lot of the things that we'll probably talk about today. So that's hard to compete with, but the research part really makes me excited.
Yeah, and in terms of like the teaching part, how does it feel for you when you get to like impart all this knowledge on people, especially like people going into the world and they're going to be using a lot of mobile devices and a lot of technology, and it's basically setting them up for how they kind of interact with technology and media.
It feels okay. So it's changing. The feeling is changing. I've been doing this for a while now. Like I said, I started at Michigan in 2005, and so in 2005, this stuff was still really new, like pretty much, like especially in terms of like what you would teach and the research that's been published that you could use. It's not that new. These kids are growing up with the topic that I'm teaching on, and I'm now in my 50s, and I'm not as up to date as they are in terms of usage. Um, and I'm a parent, so I've got my head in a different space than they have their heads as users. In many ways, they're more sophisticated with this technology than I am in their own everyday lives. So I have to address that in a way that my purpose in this class is not to, like, as you say, impart knowledge, I guess, about the technology so much as to try to give them new language and concepts to help them think and talk and write about the way that they're using or the way that the people use and the implications for their well-being and how the social structure has changed with the technology. So try to give them new sets of concepts, new language that they could use to rearrange very familiar things. But also another level of this is that so much of what we do with mobile media and what it means for our lives is taken for granted. It's very much kind of like telling time, this is, telling time in a mechanical way is so incredibly meaningful on the individual and societal levels. It's hard to really appreciate that. And we don't, right? We're taking for granted. We're used to it. It's like oxygen. Mobile phones are kind of like that too. So one thing I can do is to try to get them to become more sensitive and aware and open their eyes to kind of take the fish out of the water. And that's a fun thing to do in the classroom.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, and I love your perspective as opposed to thinking of it as like imparting knowledge, but rather equipping them with the tools and things they need to view media and I guess technology. So that's super interesting.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, I'd love to, get to know you a bit more with a section we've got. Have you met Scott Campbell? So here, I'm just going to ask you some little get to know you questions before we dive into today's topic. So my first one for you is, do you have a favorite book or anything that you're reading at the moment?
Yeah, I think the book that I'm gonna I'm reading. Well, all right. I'm going to mention Brave New World. I'm reading a few different things right now, and I'm tempted to talk about all of them, actually.
You can.
Yeah, they would all be really fun and spicy. But actually, so Brave New World, I've read it, Aldous Huxley, several times, and I've always just read it for fun. But I do think that, and also, I've been a sucker for those kinds of books, like sort of somewhat dystopian, futuristic, technologically oriented books. Player Piano by Kurt Vonnegut. It's not one that people know about so much. It's his very first book that did not make him famous. It was Slaughterhouse-Five that came later. He's an American author. I don't know if he's that famous there, but his first book was very much like this dystopian, futuristic statement about technology and society, George Orwell's 1984. So I recently reread Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and his perspective is basically, it's really interesting. It's the idea that that we have to kind of pacify ourselves socially, and people are. It's not just about technology, but what grabbed me was the idea of solitude and individuality, and how pathological it is in his book Brave New World. And it actually inspired a line of research. Like, I know it's just a vision, but a vision of the future in this scenario where solitude is pathological. And then I'm thinking about the constant connectivity that's available through mobile media today, and social media, and the expectations that go along with that. And it made me think about solitude. And we used to have two types of it. We used to have the type where we choose to go be alone, and then we also had the type where we just had to deal with that sometimes. But if you think of solitude as communication, not just being with somebody physically, but like, communicating socially, then there's no need to ever have to experience it if you don't want to. And that to me, Brave New World got me thinking in those directions. And so I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I haven't heard of that one, but that's why I love asking this question because I feel like I get so many good recommendations.
Oh, it's like 1932. It's fair enough. If it's like 190 years ago, so it's okay. It's an old classic. Yeah, I'm not talking about anything fresh. I am reading The Every by Dave Eggers. He wrote The Circle, and this is the follow-up to The Circle. It's a dystopian take on social media and society, and it's hilarious, and I recommend it.
Oh, okay. So that one's a newer one.
It is a newer one, and maybe a year or two.
Okay, amazing. And Brave New World, I'm curious, is like the writing style very different considering it was done like almost a century ago?
Surprisingly compelling. I mean, yes,
Okay.
different, but not. Sometimes I have a hard time reading old stuff because you got to chew through the differences in style and all that, and it can come across less engaging. And this, not so much. But yeah, you can tell it's written a long time ago, but written by somebody who is kind of on the edge of really trying to reach people and speak to them. So not in a stodgy way.
Yeah, I feel like that's what puts me off like reading older books because I feel like I won't be able to relate to the language. But it's really good to hear that you had a good experience with this one.
Yeah, this book tries to give you the perspective of the ordinary everyday person. And so, you get that perspective, I'd say, in terms of like really the voice. But so this is maybe explaining why it doesn't feel so old, because the author is trying to envision a future. And so it's the thoughts and statements and behaviors and feelings of an every ordinary day person, but, hundreds of years down the road or whatever.
So, my next question is about movies. So, I'd love to ask if you've got a favorite movie or if you recently enjoyed watching anything.
So I very recently saw the movie The Holdovers, which I really enjoyed. I don't go to a lot of movies, and so it had been a while. I think the Oppenheimer and Barbie all in one weekend was the last time I went to a movie. I want to plug The Holdovers. I want to say it's a good movie. I don't know if it's out in Australia or will be, but it's funny, and Paul Giamatti's in it. I also want to mention that I recently streamed Ex Machina, which is a very interesting movie about AI and kind of draws into question the lines between technology and human and what happens when technology becomes self-aware. So without spoiling it too much, I want to plug that one as well. Those are a couple of movies that I've seen recently that I've enjoyed. How about you?
Well, yesterday I watched Godzilla Minus One, which was interesting. Definitely not the type of movie I watch normally, just because I struggle to watch movies where I have to read subtitles and watch something at the same time. I don't know. I prefer to do one or the other. But it was actually really good, and it has like really great reviews as well. I'm not sure if it's out in the United States, but definitely a really good movie. But yeah, I haven't heard of the holdovers. I don't know if it's like new to America first and then it's going to come here, but that sounds really interesting as well.
Yeah, I think it's my sense is it's one of those movies that probably won't be like a blockbuster, but that the critics will give it a lot of really good reviews. So,
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll be able to stream it somewhere eventually. So that's
oh,
exciting.
of course, yeah.
Great. Well, moving on, I'd love to ask if you listen to podcasts at all or if that's up your alley.
I do some. I just got done listening to 17 podcasts this week. I
Oh,
assigned a podcast as an assignment in my class. My mobile communication seminar at the end of the term, the requirement was to create a podcast and to present that podcast to the class. And the
wow.
podcast had to have some sort of thematic focus on the uses, consequences, effects of mobile media and communication.
So you listen to 17 podcasts.
Well, the students, there's 17 students in my class, and they were all required to present their podcasts in class to us. So we all enjoyed them together
Oh.
over a period of 2 class periods. So yeah,
Oh, that's lovely. Were they long podcasts?
they were some. They were usually around 10 to 12 minutes, and the students presented usually about 10, 8 minutes. Some of them were about 35 minutes, though. A
Oh,
few
wow.
outliers. Yeah, I told them that was okay if they wanted to.
Oh, that's so cool. What were the topics on?
Let's see. There are different topics because I wanted them to kind of have a focus, but so I would say that several students were interested in expectations for relationships, different types of relationships. So, um, romance, long distance, but also friendships. And then there was a lot of interest in like the expectations, like how long can it take before you respond, or what does it mean when blah blah blah, this, or if they put a period in their message, But also they were very interested in how those were playing out very differently for people of different age groups at different points in the life cycle. So they're, older adults had very different things to say about everything really than the teenagers and the young people that they were interviewing.
That sounds really interesting. I feel like those are niche topics that you don't really get to talk about every day. So that would have been really fun.
Yeah, I would say, and this was kind of the point of the class. I think the students did a pretty good job of trying to peel back some of the layers of that kind of cover the unseen aspects, and so habit, for example, some of the students were talking about habit, and I'll be talking about habit, I'm sure, today with you, because habit actually explains a lot of what people do with their media, with their smartphones. Habit means that you're not really thinking, you're just kind of going with the motions, going through the flow of things that through in a routine kind of automatic way. And so students were very interested in habit and habits as they play out in texting, and what does that mean? But also habits as they play out in different spaces, and habits as they play out in maybe a social media context versus some other type of media. So, but yeah, it was pretty engaging stuff. Like the way that they were thinking about, habits are by definition things that we're not thinking about. It's like automatic behavior. So once we stop and we look at it and we talk about it and we make a podcast about it, you're kind of breaking some of the power of the habit there.
So, lastly, I'd love to ask if you have a famous role model or just anyone in your life that you look up to.
Is this a personal question or a professional question?
It could be either. Up to you.
All right. All right. Well, okay. I have this banjo teacher. I play banjo, and My teacher is a lot younger than I am. I've been taking lessons for quite a while. Well, I don't take them as frequently now, but I'll just say his name is Davey. I'll just give you his first name. And I really look up to him because he's got the kind of stoic wisdom, and he's able to reflect on things before he thinks and acts and talks, in ways that just remind me of like a wiser, older person who's like been through wars and experiences. But he was 27, 26 years old when I first started taking lessons from him. And this is quite a while back, but we've been friends, and I've always considered him a teacher, and I look up to him. And I think it's just interesting that he's a generation down, and I look up to him in those ways, because those are markers of maturity, I think. So I aspire to be as mature as my very young banjo teacher.
That's really great. I think that the whole thing of looking up to like your elders or having to always look up to people who are older than you is very overrated. I recently had a guest who said that she looked up to her children, which I found really beautiful. And I feel like you don't always have to have an older role model, because I feel like age doesn't really matter when it comes to finding someone inspirational.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Then I think I'm going to leave my response at that, because the rest of the things I have to talk about are like the traditional senior heroes in my field that, you would probably hear anybody talk about, from their own perspective. So,
Awesome. Well, let's leave it at that then. I feel like that's the perfect
okay.
response. Awesome.
Okay.
So, moving on, I'd love to jump into everything now. So, my first question for you is, how do you personally define mindful media consumption?
This is something that I'll say first that I've been thinking a lot about. Mindful media it's not a conversation. Media mindfulness is not like some popular phrase. You will see it pop up in very sort of niche little places here and there, maybe like a church pamphlet or, I've been looking for it. So I'm trying to develop the concept of media mindfulness and in my work, like formally. And I think that there's really, I want to say broadly, I'm thinking about media intelligence, and I think that this is a component of media intelligence. Again, this is something that also is just not out there. I'm looking for, other people writing about media intelligence as I mean it, but I think people are talking about like data and how much data, media have when they use the language of intelligence. And so to me, if you look at different intelligences for a moment, like social intelligence, emotional intelligence, and there's musical and other ones as well, they really kind of boil down to kind of a set of sensitivities or awarenesses or being attuned in certain ways, concepts around that, and then concepts around sort of knowing and being able to do stuff like knowledge and skills. And in a media context, so media intelligence on one side then would be media literacy, which is knowledge and skills. And we have had a lot of conversations about media literacy, and we go to media literacy for answers to our problems, at the individual level. We rely on it. But the other component that's missing is media awareness. So the other intelligences, they have the sensitivities, the attunements, but also like with social intelligence, they just call it social awareness. So that awareness level is something that I'm trying to bring more attention to and unpack different levels and dimensions to it so that we can put it together with literacy. Literacy plus awareness equals media intelligence. And so I'm thinking of media mindfulness as having different layers of consciousness. On the one hand, with literacy, let me just say that literacy means it's critical thinking, right? It celebrates critical thinking skills. That's one of the proposals of media literacy. So with media mindfulness, not all of it is critical thinking. Actually, what I'm proposing is that layer of traditional mindfulness, but with an awareness of media where it's non-judgmental awareness. Get a real sense of the landscape, because it's, I think, more complicated than people realize. Media are embedded in our spaces, they're embedded socially, and there's these technological dimensions to them as well. And they are configured and intersecting in complicated and invisible ways with digital. You can't see. So I think that like we have to have social awareness and emotional awareness. We have to have media awareness, and it's difficult. And I think that we need to have this layer of non-critical, just allowing the experience, just to get a sense of the media that's out there. And then also directed awareness, where our awareness is, I don't just use this language, others do too, meta awareness, where we become aware of our awareness and then it takes on some direction. And we can maybe then consider the social, the technological, and the spatial configurations I was talking about.
Yeah, how do you think then media sort of mindfulness connects to productivity if we like have the media literacy and we also have this awareness?
I think it connects to everything, actually, in many ways. With regard to productivity, I mean, I generally think that media, in the same ways that we can say media literacy enhances, or protects or reduces, reduces misinformation vulnerability, enhances privacy protection. I think we could say that that media awareness is also going to function in that same way. And so if media literacy might help us with productivity, I think there's reasons to believe that media awareness would help us with productivity as well. One of the things about media awareness is I think it supports, so being more aware, especially directed awareness, I think would provide the conditions under which you can think about your goals. And this is one of the problems with media habits, is that people are operating in automatic ways. Like when you brush your teeth, when you're actually brushing your teeth, you're really not thinking about the movements and it's really familiar routine. Your mind is going in other directions. It's like that when we're scrolling now. And a lot of times, we can just automatically fall into patterns. And so I think that having this more sensitivity to this awareness level can kind of disrupt that and create more space in which we can apply goals. Social media, there's research and a lot of things in the popular press very recently about how social media is like designed to be addictive, and so I'm not sure I want to say I completely agree with that. I think habits go a lot farther than addiction in my world to explain their problems of mobile and social media. But to speak to that though, I guess my point is that I will say that social media is a place where it invites an awful lot of things that may have absolutely nothing to do with what you really want to get done if you're thinking about productivity. So I would say with social media, if you want to fight the pull, it does have a magnetic pull for habit. A lot of people argue addiction. I'm not a big addiction advocate as far as social media is concerned. I think a small percentage of people have addictions to it. Most people, I think, have social media habits, and a lot of those habits are not good. That's different than an addiction. But I think that that if we can identify our goals and decide how and which social media are fit for purpose, that mindfulness allows us to be in line with our goals, and habits do not allow us to be in line with our goals. Our goals are blinded from us. They're shielded then.
Yeah, and how do you think all of this fits into like the context of the holidays?
It's interesting. I've been thinking about this because, habits can be good or bad, first of all, but habits are about routines and their regular patterns. And as we enter the holidays, I feel like the regular, normal routines of everyday life are disrupted. I think the workplaces are disrupted. Obviously, the hours, they shut down sometimes, or there's a lunch or a workplace party. The regular routines of everyday life are disrupted during the holidays in ways that might be kind of cool when you think about our habits. And a lot of our habits represent ruts that we're in. Not all of them. Some of our habits are amazing. Some of our habits are very healthy and fantastic. But I think it's the habits that what I want to think about is maybe our bad habits, And so if routine is a space that invites all habits, including bad habits, and the holidays is a space that shakes up our routines, then maybe it's an opportunity to redefine our habits, at least to break some of our old ones. So if people are thinking about what it is that they're, for example, in everyday life, doing with maybe social media that they want to change, or anything that they want to change, but we're talking about social media. I think the holidays are a perfect time to make those changes because they provide a space for our brains to be confronted with novelty.
Yeah. And what do you think some of these bad habits could be?
Well, I mean, one of the more basic, well, there's a bunch of them. One of the first one that I studied, I published a paper in 2012 with a grad student on texting while driving. And at the time, there wasn't much research on it, but the research that was published was using rational choice models to explain it. And the theories that they were using were about rational choices. So why are people choosing to text and drive? This paper that I did with a grad student looked at rational choice models, and then we looked at habit as an alternative explanation. And habit, the way that we measured it and studied it, habit stood out as a significant predictor of why people reportedly text and drive. So I think texting and driving is one of the bad habits for sure. That's the worst. That's dangerous and very, very prevalent. I think scrolling, though, is a very prominent habit that many people have. Scrolling can be, there's a funny, not funny, just relevant to our conversation study that I reviewed for a journal recently about habitual scrolling and its effect on productivity and its effect on well-being. I can't talk too much about the study because it's under review, but I just wanted to point out that there's this kind of research that's going on out there. And I think when I want to talk about productivity and the ways that people can use social media productively, but I just think that we also need to talk about how our habits can keep us away from productivity, because goals are intentional and we have to act and think in intentional ways to stay in line with our goals. Yeah. And that's, to me, what productivity is about. Habits work against our goals in the sense that we're not aware and thinking.
Exactly. And I feel like that's so true. Like, for example, if someone's goal, or I don't know, their focus during the holidays is to spend more time and be present with their friends and family, I feel like habits like texting while driving, or like scrolling, or like the need to constantly be checking in on social media, for example, can really take away from that. And it's a really hard thing to stop doing because we're so ingrained to keep scrolling because, we love the feeling of, seeing different posts and what social media does to our brains, I guess. So how do we stay on track with our goals when we're so wired to have all these sort of negative habits with media?
Right. Well, one good thing is that habits are they're neither inherent, just like social media. They're not good, they're not bad inherently, and social media isn't either, by the way. And so habits are both good and bad habits are invited through technology and social media. So we can look at it like, yeah, it does invite a lot of bad habits. It invites a lot of checking without thinking. When people are checking 1,000 times a day, which I think happens, that happens in between the spaces of thinking and stuff, right? And so that is kind of concerning. But on the other hand, we can also have good habits. For example, if it's you're in a habit of just like checking on the mantle where you keep the keys before you leave the house, you don't even have to think, right? That's a good habit to have. I mean, we have a lot of those kinds of habits. Putting on our seatbelts is a fantastic habit that was actually supported by a public service campaign in the U.S. when I was a kid. So it was like a scientific effort to get people to develop that habit. And they found that if you put a seatbelt on 21 times in a row, on average, it starts becoming automatic. So it was, with mobile phones, I think that there's an opportunity to lean on habit as the explanation for why people are texting and driving. If we can lean on habit to get people to put seatbelts on, let's lean more heavily on habit, get people to recognize their habits. It doesn't show up as much, like we hear about addictions and we hear about campaigns that dance around habits, but don't really engage with habit and what it means, I think.
Yeah.
But there are good habits too. I just want to say that, like, we don't have to just worry about the bad habits. It's a space where really good habits happen too, because that's what we are. We're habitual creatures. So being aware of our habits and trying to direct them in the right directions, we can change and break them down through patterned behavior, just like we build them up through patterned behavior.
Yeah, and I feel like here in Australia, for example, with the whole texting and driving thing, we've recently had these cameras implemented in a lot of like roads where they detect if you're on your phone, and that automatically results in a fine. So that's been sort of like this incentive for people to stop being on their phones, or even touching a device can result in a fine or consequence. So there's like this external enforcement of, don't be on your phones while you're driving. How do we get better at like doing that for ourselves instead of relying on, external forces being like, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, to create a better
Right,
habit?
right. I really like what you just said first, because that was why I wrote this paper. Was the answers didn't really see what the problem was. The problem really is, a habit, right? And how do you break a habit? Like the law? I mean, I think laws are great and we need these laws, but I don't think we need to consider them the answer, because actually it didn't affect texting and driving in our country. The rates really didn't change that much. If you look at the laws, it in some places it had some effect, but not great. So, how do you get people there? This is why I'm talking about media awareness. Media mindfulness is one piece of awareness. There are other aspects of awareness besides just in the moment consciousness. There's also like what to be aware of, right? That's a question when it comes to media. And I think, 40 years ago, the answer to that would have been like, well, that radio, that television, and that newspaper, what to be aware of. And the flows of the influence of those things and stuff. Today, it's really complicated, and media are embedded in our spaces, and we create new spaces through mobility, the ubiquity of media and the layers of expectations. There's social, there's spatial, there's technological. So I think that if we can get people to, not just like in terms of not just being conscious, but also being able to sort of direct their consciousness in a media way that grapples somewhat with the spatial and the social and the technological dimensions. That's important.
Yeah, and kind of taking this back to the idea of like the holidays, we've just been talking about habits, and I'm not sure about you, but a lot of people, and myself included, associate the holiday period to, taking a break from certain things, taking a break from like social media, for example. Do you think that we need to entirely take a break from media and social media in order to enjoy times like this, or is it more about just breaking certain habits and creating better ones?
Probably yes to everything that you just said, I think. Um, like I said, I think that holidays maybe are a great time to take a break from the perspective of the way that routines are shaken up. So if you're doing things out of habit and your routine is shaken up, then that should be fertile grounds for breaking a habit or stepping away from a habit or something. So, people give stuff up a lot. You're right, around the holidays, and it might be actually something that helps them. It's not really a reason to do it though. Like you're asking, should they do it? Yeah, I think so. I mean, if it helps them become more aware. So, I think my whole everything I probably am saying to you today is coming from the point of advocating for heightened awareness of media and realization of really how pervasive it is, and the implications and the unseen layers of it that we not just take for granted, but sometimes they're just not on the radar. We need more on our radar. And I think awareness is how we can, like, where we can start. I think that we have to be motivated to be aware. So we could also have conversations about how do we get people to really care, why it matters. But I think with the holidays, it's a good time to shake up your habits. And how do we get people to change their habits? I think getting them to become aware of their habits to begin with is the most important thing, because habits are about being in moments that you're not acting with awareness. So you'll have to take a kind of like a meta perspective and take a step back from yourself, kind of pretend like you're a witness to yourself, and look at your regular everyday practices and think about to what extent they might be habitual or not. That would be, I think, the way to get people to start changing their habits, is by being aware of them in that way.
Yeah, and say someone's done that, so they've decided to like take a step back and they've realized that something they're doing in the moment is habitual. What should be the next step from there?
Well, this is just kind of speculative. I mean, it's based on things that I read about and the research and stuff, but I can't say that there's a formula for or a right answer for how to do this. But beyond awareness, so habits are kind of we could talk about them as sort of routines that become ingrained and eventually kind of become a part of who you are. So I think one of the things we have to have is real expectations. If we want something to become a habit, is this really part of who could this be part of who I am? So maybe I don't know. I don't have any really good examples off the top of my head, but if it's something that just isn't going to be aligned with just who you are, that won't work. But moving your behavior in that direction and having it just be regular. So whether the habit be, let's say the keys, for example, you lose your keys and you find yourself in real trouble, you need to help yourself. So you need a key habit, so you can develop that habit by doing that consciously, regularly, routinely. And over time, the consciousness starts going down and down and down, and the routineness of it goes up. And eventually it can, and not always does, but it can just become a regular part of how you leave the house.
Yeah. And I'm curious, what role do you think sort of self-regulation plays in all of this?
Okay, so from a researcher perspective, it's treated almost always as a variable that is a disposition. So something that maybe you're really high on and I'm really low on. Not like something that we manipulate ourselves. And I don't know if I like the story of that, but that is kind of how it's treated is, so the effects of this habit on productivity and well-being would be moderated or conditioned or shaped by the extent to which that person has a lot of self-regulation as a trait, so it gets treated as a trait in the research, really, for the most part. Not something that and that's too bad, because actually I think it would be useful to think of self-regulation as this thing that can change and flux in the moment. So what are the conditions that support self-regulation or foster it or hinder it or whatever? Those might be more interesting questions right now, rather than kind of shrugging your shoulders and just accounting for it, recognizing it as really important, but not as something that really changes in the moment. That's how it's treated. And I think that's one way that it could be treated better.
Yeah, and I guess it would be pretty tough if you were low on self-regulation and if that wasn't really that inherent to you.
It would be, but I think if we think about these things as competencies, competencies, some people have a great capacity for certain competencies and other people just don't, and so some people just, they're born whatever with so much capacity for self-regulation, and other people are born with a lot more capacity, right? Whatever we can do to maximize our capacity and make it better is meaningful. And that's the perspective I have. So whether you're, let's say, you're a prodigy, you're born to be, like Beethoven, or whether you're somebody who starts taking music lessons when they're 40 and maybe they'll never play live, but their life could be super enriched by that. Still, it is.
Yeah.
I see it all the time.
Yeah, I think those
So
are
yeah,
really great examples.
yeah, even if they don't have the great capacity for, being a genius or whatever. So our competencies, like whatever our self-regulation capacity is, maximize it. It's important. It's key, especially if it's limited, right? If it's limited, then you really need it hitting on all cylinders. So those are the people maybe that deserve the most attention.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well. I've never really thought about that through the lens of like competencies like you've just talked about.
Yeah, well, I'm bumping into this as I read about the literature on media literacy and media awareness. And competency is one of the things that gets addressed. Is what do we do about it? And there's really kind of a couple of takes on it out there. And the one I just gave you, it's mine, and I've seen some other things that align with that. That you can focus on how much you can change your competencies. I'd say the more dominant perspective though is to shrug them off and say, well, you're just not really born, to be a great musician,
Yeah.
but we need to account for this and factor it into our equation.
Mm.
So yeah, that to me is not a great way of thinking. It's not a very hopeful way of thinking about competencies.
Yeah, definitely. And on the line of like examples, I'd love if you could share some potential examples of what mindful media consumption like looks like.
Mm, sure. I'll say broadly before I give you any examples
Yeah.
that mindful media consumption literally means experiencing media with awareness. Um, so, okay, can I give you? It's easier to give you the flip side of examples. Can I give you some favorite example of non-mindful media?
Yeah,
Is that
sure.
okay?
Yeah,
All
go
right.
for it.
Because I mean, this is all right. This is an example of mindful media. I mean, we're both, I think, very attuned and aware of what's going on in the situation. We're not taking too many things for granted right now in terms of even our privacy and what's being recorded and how this is going to be appropriated later, not just what's happening now. So this is very mindful. This is a great example. But okay, so there's a study called "The Isles Have Eyes." And it's by Joe Turow. He's at the University of Pennsylvania. And it's an interesting study of the way that certain retail stores are able to track mobile phones without people knowing. So they're tracking their movements in order to, and their consumer behavior in order to basically optimize their store layout, so that they can get people to do more shopping and stuff. And then in some cases, they're able to track beyond the store too. So people are totally unaware, like they're doing this through the location or even Bluetooth. Sometimes there's a couple of different ways. And I'm not exactly sure about the technicalities of exactly how it's happening, but it's a perfect example of how it's not. So awareness is important because sometimes it's not our fault, like sometimes we should be aware and there's opportunities to be aware and we need to open our eyes. Other times, it's so institutionalized or it's even surreptitious increasingly. Who knows what actual data is being collected by, any of the web services we've, used in the last couple of hours ourselves, So I think awareness is increasingly important for these reasons.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of awareness, I think something, well, that I can relate to is procrastination and being aware of like my own procrastination when it comes to reinforcing better habits. That I'm aware that I've got certain habits with the way I use media, but obviously I procrastinate doing something about it. So I know you've got some insights into procrastination research. Would you be able to share how this might relate to, creating better habits and also like the holiday season as well?
Yeah. Procrastination is it's one of the concerns, along with, it reminds me of sleep. And I'm going to include sleep in this because sleep is the procrastination of sleep. Basically it is a specific flavor of it. Oftentimes we're thinking about work or working out or taking the dog for a walk, but sleep is one of the major issues too. that I'm thinking about. And so it is kind of a hot topic, I would say. It's one of the concerns, and it's a popular thing because it's something that everybody experiences in everyday life. It's just a regular, normal, everyday challenge. And so it's interesting because on the one hand, procrastination is about time. It's about delaying things, right? If on the one hand, I think that our mobile and social media, that it collapses a lot of time stuff. So like just the basic example of texting, you can weave that into the moments and the flows of everyday life. Whereas a phone call, you kind of got to step away and it's a separate thing, it takes time. And so on the one hand, a lot of time gets compressed in that way. But on the other hand, I think that we're not always like spending a lot of time with a certain amount of content. For streaming, we are, but there's just so many opportunities to go and do different things. And so if we are kind of, say, digitally wandering, on TikTok, and then maybe that takes us over to X, and that takes us over to Facebook or something like that, we start going maybe down rabbit holes, the case might be, that's where procrastination can happen, I think. And it's weird because on the one hand, these technologies, you can pop in and out here and there, and you don't have to set time aside to use them like we used to have to with TV. But on the other hand, they just open up so many different universes. And I think this is where it's like the opposite of goals, like just, falling into different rabbit holes or taking up different social media links into different lines of, and I've done this, I don't know if you have, but,
Yeah.
and then you're looking at this YouTube video, that there's those opportunities. And without your goals, it's easy to do that because it's fun, it's rewarding, So anyhow, again, I'm just advocating for awareness. And I think that if we can recognize which social media are fit for purpose and what our goals are, then I think we can stay on target. And I do have a few notes on what I think good like uses of social media are for productivity that I could talk about.
Yeah, actually, like that was going to be my last point, Scott. I'd love if you could share some different examples or just like strategies individuals can use to sort of navigate social media in a way that enhances their productivity.
Sure. This is not like my super in-depth area of expertise or whatever. This is just kind of me reflecting on not just regular and ordinary life things, but, stuff I read and teach and things I hear people talk about. When I think of productivity in social media, like in terms of, I guess, my ability to speak to it, I would say that the overarching message is that it depends. So, we talk about social media as kind of one thing, and it's really not. It's a collection of very, very different platforms with very different types of affordances and participants and communities and stuff like that. So it really depends. And I want to illustrate with 3 examples of social media for productivity how it can depend.
Yeah.
Okay, so 3 areas I can think of. One of them is getting the word out. This should be pretty intuitive. If part of your job is to communicate and like I'm thinking of somebody who I know who is an event coordinator for a nonprofit, and they are seeking volunteers, they're seeking donations. Social media enhances their productivity incredibly by being able to spread those messages through the networks. They're getting their job done much more productively in that way. So it depends, it depends on which social media. That wouldn't work for YouTube. That wouldn't work for certain, it does work for Facebook. You have to think about, like, do people go out there socially? What are they, there's a lot of considerations, but I just want to say one area of being productive is, I'd say, getting the word out. Another area is getting the word in. And by that, I mean, you getting insights from other people that you seek through social media. So there's a lot of social capital in, let's just go back to Facebook for a second again, a lot of weak ties that are out there, close ties too, but just a lot of people that maybe are in your friendship network that, like, let's say we're talking about movies, and I don't go to a lot of movies. So, God, I don't want to go to a bad one. It's really useful to ask, what's a good movie? You put that out on Facebook and take a look at those answers, and you can make a well-informed decision. Or if you're a professor like me teaching something, has anybody read this? Or do you have a recommendation for this? Getting the word in through your networks. And then the third, that can help your productivity, not just what movie to go to, but like, how to put my class syllabus together and stuff. And then finally, just building the networks that themselves. That's part of one's productivity, I think, sometimes, is to have a network of weak ties, so that you have a nice diverse set of resources and differences to draw from, through those connections. So that's kind of in general. I'm not talking about holiday much in our conversation or in that sense, but I just wanted to throw that out because I did think about like really the ways that people use social media for productivity, but it's also very contextual and nuanced,
Yeah, definitely. And I think those are great examples. And if we wanted to even relate them to the holidays, I guess we could even just say like using social media or like media in ways that serve you best and, what you want to be doing and stuff. But obviously, I feel like productivity is very subjective. Everyone's got a different, view on what it is to them or what it looks like to them on social media, which I guess can make it a bit tricky sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I have some other thoughts actually about the holiday season that might be relevant here too. That,
Yeah.
I was saying, holiday season is where our routines are disrupted. But maybe actually, and I was thinking maybe that's a great space for breaking habits. Maybe it's a place where we have to be really careful of our habits. Actually, I want to go back and maybe change my mind on this
Yeah.
because of that breaking of the routines. So habits I'm being a geeky professor now, but like habits as a concept are part of the self, right? And it's the self acting naturally, automatically. It's enacting itself out without you even having to direct it. So if there's chaos around you or just novelty, things are changing, right? I could see habits actually kicking in to try to counterbalance that instability that's happening in the regular everyday life environment. And then getting back into your habit just makes you feel more comfortable. And maybe that's why people drink more during the holidays and, I don't know, that, or eat more, who knows? But it might be a time where we need to be more careful of our habits, really. And that could apply to mobile and social media. Say that, let's say that there are already the expectations to be accessible are really high. And we don't really realize how high they are, but like, depending on the nature of your relationship, it could be 10 minutes or 2 hours or a day goes by and it's like a serious ghosting experience, right? It could even happen at 10 or 15 minutes, depending on the situation, right? So there's a lot of expectations to be accessible during the holidays. All of that novelty I was talking about, the changes, there's a lot of coordination. There's a lot of social and instrumental, just like, so where are we going and who's bringing the rolls and, what are you getting, Dad? No, I'm getting him that, all of this kind of stuff, added layers of, I think, expectations. And if we think about just the basic case of like using your mobile phone while driving, I think part of that habit is really strengthened by expectations to be accessible. If those expectations are getting, kind of heightened, or really acute, I guess is the word I'm looking for, that could be dangerous. And that could, reinforce our bad habits, I think, when it comes to checking, driving, scrolling, etc.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing those insights with us as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that could make us less productive, I guess, if you think of it that way. So,
Yeah, and I never really thought of it as like, during the holidays, it's like an important time to be like reinforcing better habits. I guess You could even think of it as like, you know, we think of like New Year's resolutions, and we think of it as a time to really reinforce our goals and really achieve what we've been wanting to achieve. And I guess we could maybe see that the same with like the holiday period. Like this is like the time we really reinforce those habits that we've been trying to do throughout the year. And this is like the perfect time to get those right and really nail them.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I think we can segue into our next section for today, which is our practices, experiment, debrief. So, here we're just going to ask you about your everyday application of media productivity. So, is there a practice that you use to, you know, keep yourself really healthy, I guess, and sort of enhance your media productivity?
Absolutely. So like I was saying, media, how people experience media is it's about more than the technology. It has social dimensions to it. About those expectations are part of the experience. It also has spatial dimensions to it. And so I try to take all of that into consideration. And I'll give you one concrete example is I do a lot of work, certain types of work at a coffee shop around the corner. So to me, that's a media space, but it's a different media space
Yeah.
than the other places that I work. It's a different social space. It's the integration of the actual place, the technology it supports, and the social environment. So it's all perfectly matched together for me to get writing done and not to be on social media and not to be texting and not to be doing anything else that's distracting other than writing, because it's the way that the people around me, their chatter and stuff, it's a perfect level of like, they're not talking to me, so it's not distracting, but that level of noise makes me not feel like I'm sitting here by myself with my thoughts in my head. I don't know why it works for me, you know? So the social environment, it works for me. The spatial environment is great because it's not the office. And if I'm at the office, there's going to be people that are going to talk to me and stuff. It provides a good network so that I can go online, but it's also a coffee shop. It's not appropriate to like sit there and talk too much. So I try not to use my phone. So I guess, it's not like I'm unplugged there. I'm still online, but I'm plugged in with very clear boundaries when I'm in that particular place. And that is a very strong routine that I have that fosters productivity.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like what you're saying is you're changing the way you use media, and you're changing, I guess, your relationship to it by changing the context in which you're using your device. And I feel like if I were to do something like that, it would be the fact that when I'm at home, I feel very comfortable to be doing whatever I want to be doing on my devices, whether that is going on my phone for an extended period of time instead of doing the work I want to be doing. But if I were to remove myself from that space and take myself to like a library or like a cafe where productivity is more inherent because I've traveled there to be productive, then it's going to make me want to do the things that I actually need to do.
Yeah, right. And so I think that these are like things that we do. And I think to the extent that we can become more aware of them, we can become more directed in doing things that are positive like that. I don't want to just talk about habits. I want to also mention routines, because like routines are kind of a step away from habit, but like I don't want to confuse them together. But like what we're talking about now is a great way of establishing healthy routines, which can become, I think, habit. So I would say awareness to routines to habit would be the way of pushing yourself in new positive directions or
Yeah.
different. You can also take an existing habit and change it. I think habits are malleable. I think you can take a habit. I think it's different than addiction in the sense that I don't think you have to completely I could be wrong about this, but I think that you could change aspects of a habit, the nature of it in certain ways, if you consciously readjust the patterns of that behavior.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a really good thing to put out there as well. Like habits aren't set in stone. you can always change them, and like you said, they're malleable and to your life as well, because I feel like as you get older, as things change in your life, your habits are going to need to change to suit those different things as well. So I feel like that's an important message to get out there.
Yep. Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And how do you feel like this practice that you have has sort of changed your perception on productivity?
Hmm. Well, I mean, it's, I've noticed that it's changed productivity itself. Huh.
Yeah.
So, it's just, I'm more productive. When I leave the space that I just mentioned, that particular coffee shop, um, I've always got at least several paragraphs, of productive writing. And that's what I usually go there for, is just productive writing. I don't go there all day, every day, just when I need to get productive writing done. And then if I'm doing productive writing somewhere else, I mean, it's a lot less. So I just perceive the amount. The results are very obvious. But it also, it was was it conscious? It might be something that I stumbled. I think it might have been a happy accident, actually. Like, I don't think I deserve credit for choosing that as a really productive space. I think I realized it. So I would say, again, awareness. It happened through awareness. Like, oh, wow, I just wrote 7 paragraphs in, a small amount of time. And then that happens once or twice or 3 times. And then you notice a pattern, you become aware of it, you allow it to get reinforced. It becomes a routine. I don't think I can call going to the coffee shop a habit, but it's a routine.
Yeah. And we're talking a lot about awareness here and making conscious decisions, but like you just said, some of it is unconscious. You're doing certain things and then you're realizing that you are creating a habit or you do have a habit, and you have to sort of negotiate whether or not that is helpful towards yourself, or if that's something that I guess you need to change, or like you said, habits are malleable, so we can workshop them.
Yeah. As you were just saying that, I thought of a really good example with my practice. So I would say at home, I have a habit of petting my dog. There's no question, right? I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times or when I pet my dog throughout the day. Wouldn't be able to, because it's just this thing I do all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's and without thinking. My dog's not at the coffee shop, right? So that's probably, that habit probably explains one of the reasons why I'm less productive at home, and how a mindful repositioning of ourselves socially, spatially, etc., can change the conditions under which habits play out. So in that way, I disrupt that habit.
So to round off today, Scott, we've just got a last little section called open mic. So here I just hand it over to you to talk about anything that you would like to. You could continue our discussion that we've already done today, or it could be a totally new topic. So it's all up to you.
Sure. So I think I want to come back, if it's okay, maybe to the idea of media intelligence and how I guess media mindfulness it would be kind of a one piece of that. Um, and I just want to mention that I've been poking around at this a little bit. Of course, there's the intellect, the IQ, which is the traditional intelligence that people think about. And you've probably heard of, I think, maybe emotional intelligence, maybe
Yeah.
social intelligence.
Yeah.
And then there's this a guy in psychology, a scholar named Gardner, who actually identifies 8 different types of intelligences, including musical intelligence, linguistic intelligence, bodily kinetic intelligence. And, I'm a communication and media scholar, right? And so I'm reading about all of these intelligences, and because I'm looking for insights related to awareness, related to literacy. I wasn't, really thinking about intelligence, but I was looking at other things related to awareness and literacy. And I realized, oh, these things about awareness, this being sensitive to being sensitive in a media kind of way, being sensitive to how media, whether your data is being collected, whether something's being recorded, whether, there are cameras in the area or not, those kinds of levels of awareness show up in other intelligences. And the same thing with literacy, the skills, the abilities, like with music, knowledge of musical forms and the skills to be able to play music. Those are on the literacy side of things, and in a media way, knowledge about media and skills to use media, to protect your privacy or to craft a message, whatever the case is, those are literacies, right? And you put this stuff together, and I guess my proposition is that there should be a media intelligence, like if there's a musical intelligence, and that, in a sense, the reason why is if we think about human evolution and our environments that we live in, human beings didn't have the strongest or largest, we weren't the fastest, but we were able to, evolve and thrive nonetheless. And, and part of that is about our being aware of our environments and also our brain plasticity and our ability to adapt, So being aware and then making sense of and then adapting to our environment is what we do to change when our environments change, whether we change our environments or not, right? And now our environments are changing, right? And they're changing in very, very complex ways that I say are, integrating the social and the spatial and the technological in ways that we can't see oftentimes, with digital. It's invisible. And so I think that we need to have those kinds of that kind of the peripheral awareness that we have with vision. I think we need to have that kind of sensitivity with media. And I think that we need to maybe prioritize it as important. It's like the fabric of everyday life. I think it's where our relationships, it's a space in which our relationships, our work, a lot of things play out, and it's integrated in our personal lives, in our institutions, throughout everything, increasingly, digital layers of information and communication. And I think that that does require a certain degree of intelligence to be able to leverage that for good and to be able to protect yourself from being vulnerable to all of the harms that increasingly come along with this.
Yeah, I actually think that's some really interesting points that you brought up, and especially this idea of it being a bit more complex these days, because I feel like things are changing in a much faster, much more nuanced and complex way. And sometimes I think it's getting increasingly difficult to keep up with the rapid pace of the way things change in society. And we're all getting increasingly busier as well. So it can get really easy to be caught up in everything. And I guess needing that level of intelligence is not something everyone can afford to have, or everyone has the ability to develop and match the pace at which things are changing.
Right. And that kind of gets back to our conversation about competencies and how, my perspective is that we all have some capacity to maximize our awareness and our literacies when it comes to media. I think we all have, so that's the space in which we can work, whether that's, this space or whether it's this space is different, but.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and, opening up the discussion to a lot of different things. I feel like my key takeaways are this idea of awareness and also competencies. I feel like that was probably a highlight point for me for today, because I haven't really thought of things from that perspective. So thank you for sharing all that with us.
Oh, good. Thanks. I'm going to be sure that I watch Godzilla -1.
You should. You definitely should. If you don't mind the subtitles and the movie going on at the same time, you'll love it.
No, I'm going to check it out. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, before I let you go, if our viewers want to find out a bit more about you, where can they go?
I will just direct them to a website at the University of Michigan where I work in the Department of Communication and Media. They'll find, I don't want to put my email out there to the entire world, I think, on the podcast, but they will find me at my department. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Communication and Media at the University of Michigan. So they can find me there. There's email information out there. And I would be glad to answer questions or whatever.
Great. Thanks so much again, Scott.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed talking with you. I hope you have good holiday seasons.
Oh, you too. And to everyone listening, thanks so much for tuning in. If you missed any of that, we've got Scott's details down in the description below. But I hope everyone has a Merry Christmas and a great holiday season, and we'll see you guys next time. You have been listening to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website pp.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.